Hi, I'm Catlin, and I'm going to show you how to install a GPS tracking device in a 26G.
Welcome to Service Call, a mechanic's guide to service, troubleshooting, and repair. And on this episode,
The GPS device that we're installing today is this guy right here. The wiring that I ran through is just right here. If it's powered correctly, the device should start flashing an LED. It's labeled GPS tracker, so I'm just going to remove the tape off of it.
need a GPS device or installer? Visit tecmogps.com.
These tracking devices can be installed in machines or vehicles that are 12 and 24 volt systems. In this particular machine, you can do the install in many different ways, but this is the way that I would do it. Basically, the device is hidden as much as possible in the vehicle or in the machine in this case. It needs to be in a place where it's not totally enclosed by metal. Metal will certainly cause issues with satellite reception. You want to try to expose it a little bit. In this machine, I'm going to mount it down below in this area over here where it can still kind of see a little bit through the metal louvers. It's going to be powered off the fuse block. The fuse block is right underneath the seat in this machine, so I'm essentially just going to run my wires down behind these panels and come out to this point where I'm going to mount the GPS. Some people will wire it off of the ignition, some will go off the fuse block, some will go right off the battery. You want to try to hide it the best you can. I like to go off the back of the fuse block and enclose the wiring in some sort of black loom or tape. Our GPS device that we're installing today is this guy right here. It's fairly small, fairly water resistant. We've got power harness here. We're going to solder our connections and heat shrink over them. Tools that you will need, you'll certainly need a multimeter, knife for cutting some of the existing tape off and such. We're going to use a relay for our immobilizer, cutters here, and a drill, and in this case, a battery-powered soldering pencil. The wiring is going to get covered up in this split loom, and this is going to be our starter kill or immobilizer wiring. So the starter wire that's in this machine is fairly thin. I believe it's about 18 gauge. The wire that I'm going to use is slightly thicker. It's 14 gauge. In order to find the proper wires in the machine, you're going to want to use a multimeter to test for power and the starter wire. In addition to the tools and the items that you see here, you might need some other things like a socket and a ratchet set. Certainly some way to fish the wires through. You don't want to solder, you can use a crimper. I would say that's about it. It's pretty easy.
Now let's install a GPS.
You're going to want to prep your harness, try to make it look as neat as possible and as factory as possible. So what I like to do is, I like to do this away from the machine. This particular device has a fairly long harness, which makes it fairly easy to hide. Very flexible on mounting locations, basically. Every device is going to have certainly a power ground connection, usually an ignition wire, which will initiate the 1-minute tracking, and then this one has an output. So this output we're going to use for the immobilizer connection, and it's a negative output. So in order to make that work, we have to use this relay, and this relay is going to be driven by this negative output, as well as a connection to true ignition, which I will explain later, and the starter connection, which we're going to use this wire for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the harness with the black loom, like so. Kind of eyeball the length and shorten later. And this connection here, you want to protect it somehow, and I'm going to do that with just some exterior tight tape. So immobilizer relay, you're going to want to use a 12 volt relay for this smaller machine. However, some of the bigger, heavier duty machines are 24 volt. All relays are going to be labeled. Just simply just look on it. It'll say 12 volts or 24 volts. Next step is to start working on the machine. So I'm going to take apart this panel here, 3 17 millimeter bolts, and then I'm going to get to the fuse block. All right. Okay, I'm going to use a plastic fish. I like to use plastic because if it was metal, you can easily puncture wires and short out to a chassis. I only need a short length, and I'm basically going to get from an access hole from here down to where I'm going to run my wires, or mount my GPS, I should say. We'll go the other way. There we go. Once you get your fish through the grommet, you obviously want to tape your harness to it so you can pull it back through. I've used a little spray silicone on here to make it a little bit easier to pull through. Okay, if all goes well, then it should come through here. So I'm just going to leave the cable a little bit longer than I need, just in case, and then just continue on. Same idea, there's another grommet there, so I have to get through it. Repeat the process. Okay. The wiring that I ran through is just right here, and it's coming in through that grommet, going through this one, out to the fuse block, which is right here. So next step is to get to the back of the fuse block where we're going to make our connections. We're going to look for a power, an ignition source. This machine manufacturer has made it easy for us. There is actually a fuse there that runs the starter. So if we interrupt that power circuit, the machine will not start. 2 Phillips screws, like so. And this harness is a little bit short, but pull on it a little bit, you'll get enough length. So this is where we're going to make our connections. Open up the loom. Try to do it on the side that's already kind of split. There we go. Okay, wires are mostly exposed. Now, we're going to use our multimeter, which is grounded already, and we'll look for constant power. Right now the key is turned off, and these red wires are going to be 12 volt power, 12.49, and of course color of these wires are not going to be the same for all machines. In this case it happens to be a red. Ignition, I believe, is red with white. Okay, so I'm on there. Meter doesn't really show any voltage. Turn the key on. Going to show a little bit less than 12 because the machine's not running. The key is on. A bunch of other electrical circuits are on. If I turn the key off, we should lose the voltage. On, and this machine doesn't have an accessory like a car would. So if I crank the starter now, that voltage should stay about that range. This one dropped down to about 9 volts, but that's good. As long as it doesn't go to 0 volts, then that's what we need. So as I mentioned earlier, the starter wire is actually at the fuse block. I already know what it is, but you can use your multimeter to look for it. But this is the way it's going to behave. So when the key is off, you're going to have 0 volts. Turn key on, you shouldn't really have any voltage. You might see the meter move a bit, but it's millivolts. Crank the engine and you should see the meter jump, and then it turns off the meter. Now, so that wire in this case is a white with blue, which is right here, and If we cut that wire, the machine will not start. So I'm going to cut it further back so I have somewhere to connect to. Don't cut it to here because you'll need to make a connection in there. So like so, turning the key, no start. So the immobilizer relay is basically just going to interrupt that wire. Our harness is basically going to come up this way. Power and ignition is this red and orange, which is going to be connected to the fuse block. This yellow is our starter kill and a ground. So I am going to ground off a metal bracket just up high in here. I'm going to cut it a little bit short and attach a ring terminal to it. Like so. A little dab of solder on this connector just in case. Okay, I believe that's on there pretty good. I'm gonna cover it up. Just got a heat shrink on here just to cover up the metal so it doesn't stand out too much. And then, so power is going to be about there, and ignition is actually going to need to be connected to the relay, so I'm going to double it up like so, just so it's one continuous wire. Strip those two. It's a good idea to have heat shrink, keep some of the water out. It makes it look fairly neat and tidy. For the connections to the relay, I'm just going to use actual connectors, quick disconnects. So, and the reason why I'm doubling up the two orange wires is because it is the ignition supply to the relay, to the starter relay. It's going to be here, and also to the GPS, which is going to be down in the bottom there. And this is our negative trigger. A couple of these guys. And our relay. So standard configuration for these relays is the two outer connections. So if you kind of hold it like this with the bottom pin facing in a vertical orientation, these two exterior connections will trigger the relay. So this is the internal coil, and these are usually labeled 85 and 86. Connections can be made either way, so positive voltage will trigger the relay, and you can wire it either way. In this case, I've wired negative to, I believe, 85, and power, the ignition, is going to be 86. Some instructions will show an immobilizer relay wired to constant power. Bad idea, because that relay will turn on and it'll stay on regardless of the key, and it will kill your battery, guaranteed. And it will do it fairly quickly. So that's why you want to do ignition. The other connections are going to be for the starter. So I'm just going to use this blue wire here. It's about a 14 gauge, thicker than we need for sure. And the reason why these connectors are blue versus these ones are red is that the blue ones accept a thicker gauge. The relay at rest is usually displayed on one side of it, basically 30. So terminal 30, which is always one in a vertical position compared to everything else, is the common, and 87A is in the middle. So what happens is that when the relay is connected this way, these two wires are going to be connected internally all the time, which would allow your machine to start all the time. When the relay is activated, the internal switch will open and the bottom 30 will now be connected to 87, and since there's nothing on 87, the machine will not start. And what I like to do, just in case, is just to add another connector on here just to protect the exposed terminal. Next step is just clean all this up and try to make it look as hidden and presentable as possible. Okay, so power connection is going to be this thin red wire here, which is protected by this 5-amp fuse. GPS device draws very little current, maybe half an amp at most. So I'm going to take advantage of this fused connection. So that's our constant power, ignition, should be this red with white. There we go. Prep this harness a little bit better. Basically just tape it all up. Okay, we're going to use what we call a poke and wrap technique here. So poke right through the wire. So just poke it right through the middle, wrap around. Okay, ignition is next. And the starter wire. So since this relay is driven by ignition, the starter connection can be made in any configuration. Now there's a few different ways to make this connection, but the way that I do it is cross the wires and then just kind of twist them onto each other. You want to make sure the wire is heated enough to the point where it absorbs the solder. A good test is to wait till it cools down a bit and just kind of give it a little tug. And it's holding on. Okay, more heat shrink. Connection, cross, and twist over. And just slide the heat shrink over the connections. Basically everything's going to sit like that. Okay, zip tie right through here to hold everything together. Now if we wrap this up in tape. So for the ground, I'm just going to use an existing Phillips screw. You could put a screw in through chassis metal. It's usually the best way, but I'm not 100% sure what's behind that metal, so I'm going to use an existing screw. That's in there already. And then all we have exposed is our immobilizer relay, which can be tucked in behind over here. And I'll try to zip tie it around here just to secure it better, just in case. There. Connection to the starter is made. You want to do a quick test, make sure the machine does start, which it does. Plug in our GPS, and then two tests you want to do. One is you want to make sure the device lights up. After a few seconds, if it's powered correctly, the device should start flashing an LED. The best test is always just to look it up online and make sure it's reporting. I don't have access to it. I don't have an app. Sometimes you might have an app, or you might have a computer beside you where you can look it up. In this situation, I'm the installer. I don't have access to the system, so I have to rely on someone else on the phone to activate it and to confirm that it is reporting. For this device, we're gonna need the IMEI number, and that's a fairly long 10, 12-digit number, whatever it might be. So the activation process, if it's a nice, clear, sunny day and everyone's happy, it might be a 30-second process. If it's not, it could be certainly a whole lot longer. The main thing is just make sure that your device is powered up, the lights are flashing, double check your connections through the use of the multimeter. You're not going to get it wrong. What does help is to turn on the ignition, and that will usually speed up the registration process of the device. We have confirmation that the device is reporting, it's online. 3 quick tests you should do after the install. 1 is a GPS location. 2 is ignition reporting, and I've done that earlier by turning the key on and off. And the immobilizer. So right now I'm told that the immobilizer has been turned on, so the starter is disabled. Okay, so with the device plugged in, if I walk over and turn it on and try to start it, it should not crank, which is what it's doing right now. So we're good. I'll send a quick message. So that process should only really be seconds now that the device is activated. We're in a good cellular coverage. The device communicates to the cellular network. Pretty well all of them do. So right now, I believe we're back to normal. So the immobilizer's been turned off and now the machine can start.
If your device is not reporting or is having issues, here's Catlin to provide some tips on how to troubleshoot the device.
The best place to get a signal is outside. In this situation we are inside, but our roof is made out of wood, so the wood won't block the signal. If you're having an issue and the device is not reporting, you obviously want to check for power, ground, make sure all your connections are good. If you've soldered and taped over, heat shrink, it really shouldn't come apart. But an easy way to check is after you've wired everything, here's your harness for this GPS. Using your multimeter, black is going to be your ground, red is going to be your power. And in this case, I'm just connected to a battery, but it would be the same idea in the machine. 12 volts is what there is. One other quick test you can do for the immobilizer is this yellow wire here. Connect these 2 wires together, so ground to the yellow. With the GPS unplugged, the machine should not start. So now the next step is to cover up this wiring. It's just this one's way too flashy, so I'm just going to use the slightly bigger loom that I have and some tape. And this one has a specific way of mounting with the label side up. Label's got a dead giveaway here. It's a labeled GPS tracker, so I'm just going to remove the tape off of it. I would say having the harness come out the top is better. That'll be less visible through the louvered part of this cover. Stay away from any moving parts. Just gonna zip tie that up here. There we go. So now the install is completed, it's been tested. Now I'm just gonna put it back together. So that's how you install a GPS in a 26G. Hit the like button, subscribe, and if you have any questions or comments, please mention them below.
To get affordable and high quality replacement parts, visit FortisHD.com. Thanks for all the support so far. We love hearing feedback from the community. And if there's anything you'd like to see, be sure to let us know in the comments.